Good morning, afternoon, or evening, Goon Squad, and welcome back to yet another edition of the Football Goons podcast. Wherever you are and whenever it is, we're thrilled to death that you've decided to spend a little time with us as we talk once again about the greatest game on earth. This week, we're going back in time to last season again, and we're going to label a few extremes from players and positional groups and kind of discuss how much they matter to us as fantasy owners. That's right, we're hitting you with some more fantasy this week. Get used to it. You know, we've gotten much of the research this week from Pro Football Focus's grading system. Those guys do a great job, and they've been releasing stats really frequently lately that could overwhelm kind of even the biggest football/math combo nerds out there. There's not a ton of us, but we are there. And even to me, there's just so much stuff that they have out there that it's hard to pick through and weave through what's relevant and what's not from a fantasy perspective. So what we've decided to do this week, we're going to keep this fantasy focused on some of the stats and numbers that are out there. And we're calling this podcast this week Paralysis by Analysis. And the reason behind that is, you know, it's 2017 and there's stuff everywhere. There's numbers everywhere. There's percentages everywhere. There's ratings and grades everywhere. And we want to kind of help you guys out with what's valid, what's important, what can you ignore completely, because you know, it's a year-round thing now. Even fantasy football is a year-round thing. And if you just look at too many numbers, you're going to end up saying, well, Aaron Rodgers is number one, but on this metric, he's number 7. On this metric, he's number 13. And you're going to be so confused, you can't go in confidently. So we're going to try to hit you with some of the things we think are important, some of the things we think aren't. And what we're going to do, I'm going to throw out a couple scenarios here. And the guys are either going to label this as consider it or get rid of it, because let's be honest, it's not good podcast radio if you don't come up with a catchy slogan. So, you know, we're either going to tell you, should you consider these numbers as you think about your draft, or should you just kind of discard whatever they're talking about? So we'll kick around a little bit why the metric either matters or doesn't. All right, men. So we're going to start. This might break Deal's heart a little bit here. We're going to start off with Andrew's luck and talk a little bit about Deal's boy, Andy. The curious case of Andrew Luck, this is crazy. In 2012, he's the number 1 overall pick. He's God's gift to football. He's going to be the next Peyton Manning, and he's going to replace Peyton Manning, and everybody's going to love him. But, you know, to this point, a little bit, his career's kind of been the antithesis of his last name, as this guy's immense talent has been somewhat held back by really the complete lack of skill on his offensive line. He's got a lot of talent around him in the skill positions, but his O-line's really sold him out. So here's the big stat that we're going to consider. In 2016, Andrew Luck graded out as the league's 4th best quarterback, despite his offensive line collectively as a group having the 3rd worst season out of any offensive line on any team in the entire league over the past 11 years. So, you know, this offseason in free agency, you're thinking, well, obviously, where are we going? Well, the Colts' improvement to the offensive line was 4th round project tackle Zach Banner. You know, he doesn't project to start at all. So largely what they're saying is, hey, you guys were the 3rd worst O-line in the last 11 years, and we're rolling with you again. So, you know, this is the only one we're really talking about, only one player. But are you concerned with the lack of improvement for Andrew as you rank him? And let's be honest, you've got to put him with the fantasy elite at his position.
I'm going to jump in before Deal because I'm going to let him elaborate on his favorite player from his favorite team in a second. But as much as I want to get rid of it, because Luck finished 4th last year. So even with the 3rd worst offensive line, Andrew Luck still 5 QB, a fantasy QB last season. That's what you're looking for, okay? But I have to consider it because if you go back to 2 years ago, Andrew Luck was hurt and gave you nothing, basically. You know, he played in 7 games and you know, the team went 2-5 and he was very fantasy of it for the most part. So you have to consider it because if this guy can't stay on the field, you're wasting a very high draft pick for Andrew Luck. I did it last year, and even though he finished 4th, it was still every week you were kind of waiting for Andrew Luck to just break out and throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. And, you know, consistency, but he didn't have huge elite, you know, games that you expect from a 1st, 2nd, 3rd round pick, you know. And the other thing is, I mean, he's getting average of 2 times per game in his career, more over 2 times per game in his career. The only season that he hasn't been sacked at least 30 times was the season he only played 7 games in. You know what I mean? So he's taken such a beating on him, and that line is so bad that you have to consider it because of where you need to take Andrew Luck if you want to get him, and then the injuries are going to come into play.
I'll jump in because I like Andy Luck a little bit, so I don't mind talking about him when I have the opportunity. So obviously, I'm going to throw it out. I'm not even considering it at all, and I do, as you guys might be familiar with, I do take into consideration injuries when I rank everybody. So I do consider that Luck is injured. And although he is my favorite player from my favorite team, I rarely own him because he's one of those guys that I'm not willing to pay for, even though he's my favorite player. Fantasy football is basically my favorite thing in the whole world. Don't tell my wife that I said that. So last year, Luck was sacked the second most in the NFL. Was sacked 41 times. Tyrod was sacked one more time, 42 times. So this is a stat I want to hit you with, because I do believe it is a relevant question. It does matter. But I also believe that the Colts offensive line is going to be better, going to be healthier this year. So far, it started that way, but I guess we're not even into OTAs yet, so it could go downhill. But last year, when he was sacked 3 or less times, his points per game were 21.76. When he was sacked 4 or more times, he averaged 17.08. So over 4.5 points per game better when he was sacked 3 or less times. So you have to project that he's going to be sacked 3 or less times more often than he's going to be sacked 4 or more times. And the offensive line has to be better than last year because it can't get much worse. So based on those projections and based on now they got a healthy tight end, they have healthy receivers. Hopefully Moncrief's healthy again. And I like the plus side of that 21.76 more often than I like that 17. So I look for him to be above 21 more often than he's below 21.
I think I get rid of this too, just because I totally agree with everything that's been said. The injury risk is there, but unlike Deal, as you guys and Keenan Allen know, I don't draft with injury history in mind.
Maybe start that.
Well, I'll take my 5 championships last year and be okay with the way I do things. But
that's true.
I will draft Andrew Luck. If no, I'm not saying every league, but if I feel like the rounds are there, it's the right pick. I'm not worried about the injury thing. And to me, I don't care what his line does because Andrew Luck's stat line has never cared he's never had a good line, and he always puts up numbers and scores. The thing that scares me more about him is stop running the ball. You're the Colts.
Right.
Like, I don't know how many touchdowns, like from inside the 10. Every other team is still throwing the ball because it's 2017. Last year's Colts were like in 1984, just running Frank Gore into a brick wall. But anyways, I don't consider the line because it has never mattered to him to this point.
Another stat worth mentioning, the 2 healthiest games he had last year, obviously the first game of the season against Detroit, he came out healthy, had 35.5 in his standard scoring. And then after he had a break against Pittsburgh because he was injured, came back against the Jets for 29.72. I recognize that they're not elite top of the line pass defenses, but those were when he was his healthiest. And his schedule going forward this season, he isn't running into a ton of elite pass defenses, so you should draft him.
All right, so overall we're 2-1 on the don't worry about that one, and I think Rock is probably not a 10 out of 10. Thinking changing everything. He's not ranking Andrew Luck 12th, so you can pretty much ignore this one out here at Indy. All right, topic number 2 here. We're going to title this one Road Graders. We're going to talk a little bit about the offensive line here. So fantasy championships, let's be honest, they're rarely won. Everybody wants the first pick or the pick of their choice. They're rarely won because you had David Johnson instead of Lev Bell or Zeke Elliott last year. That's not why you won it last year. Often it's won because you have to make clutch decisions kind of further down on your roster, whether it be in the draft or free agency. As you rank depth players, it's not often, though, that you head to Cleveland. And that's where I want to head right now.
Yikes.
It's to Cleveland. All right, so here's my stat. The Browns' offensive line, they added 3 players this offseason who ranked higher in blocking efficiency than any other lineman that they had last year. To put that in perspective, Joe Thomas, who is like a 26-time All-Pro tackle for the Browns, it feels like he's been there forever. He is now their 4th most efficient offensive lineman. This is an O-line to be reckoned with here. All right, so I'm gonna focus this in Cleveland, but I kind of want this to turn into just a discussion on how much you guys value offensive lines when you're considering your players. But as you weight that tier that shows up every year, where like when we're doing pre-rankings, I feel like we talk to each other and we're like, man, there's like 25 guys that are the same guy. You know what I mean? And it's like, which one do I want?
Right.
And you got all these same players. Are Crowell, Duke Johnson, rookie tight end David Njoku, Kenny Britt, Corey Coleman, are these guys more attractive because at least the opportunity of running plays will be there without Cody Kessler or whomever is going to be the quarterback running for their life? Or are you going to have Brown's brain and not let this sway you at all?
I actually went out I took the homer answer here or the easy answer, and I said I consider it and I get rid of it, just depending on what position we're talking about. I absolutely consider it for Crowell and Johnson, guys that I like, guys that I think, a lot of us goons like, guys that we think can be productive, especially with a better offensive line. I kind of get rid of it for the wide receivers because we still don't even know who their starting quarterback's going to be opening day. And that's always going to cause a problem because depending on who's throwing the ball for those wide receivers, we're not talking about.
Does that really matter though? Because whoever it is, they're not going to be really any better than the other one.
No, but it does matter to some extent because we're not talking about the top 5 receivers of the world who it doesn't matter who's throwing them the ball. We're talking about guys that are going to need stable quarterback play. So that's why I kind of get rid of the offensive line in that way. But I absolutely look at it as a plus for guys like Crowell and Duke Johnson. Just because this all the time, the teams with the best lines, not only get W's but also produce good fantasy stats. The Titans running back combo last year, Ezekiel Elliott from the Cowboys, even to some extent, Latavius Murray last year was, almost 1,000-yard back and had higher touchdown totals than most of them, more than half the league, because their offensive line is that good. So when you start talking about the best offensive lines in the league, and I don't mean that Cleveland's going to automatically jump to the number 4 offensive line in the NFL, but when you start talking about the best offensive lines in the league, those running games are good and productive.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't take quarterback into much consideration because I think they're of the 5 they have. I think they're about 6.5 dozen. So I don't think that's much consideration for me. For me, I'm not much considering Crowell and Duke because I just don't like either one of them. I think at best they're split, and I'm not willing to risk which one's getting more than 50, which one's getting the 60-40 part of that. So Njoku, I really like this year. I'm always concerned about a rookie, especially a tight end, but he's just an athletic freak, and the opportunities are going to be there. Especially they're going to be losing a lot still, so they're going to have throwing opportunities. That's another reason I'm not crazy about the running back situation. Britt, you can just scratch him off my list completely. If we rank 70, I'm not going to rank him. So, and then Corey Coleman, I mentioned last week, I love Corey Coleman this year, taking over for Terrell Pryor. I think he's going to be a difference maker this year, and I think he's going to be on a lot of championship rosters for fantasy football this year.
It's funny you say that because that's how I feel about Crowell. Like I think he's going to be a target of mine. Certainly not first, second round, but
sure.
I do think, kind of again combining your thoughts, I do think Cleveland has strong potential to leap up to that 4th best line in the league.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll get into this more in August when we talk about season preview podcasts. I think Cleveland's a surprise team. Not to go 11-5, but I don't think they're going to be constantly trailing and a team where they're chucking it around. I like Crowell a lot, and I think the line makes me like him a lot, more than anything else. I mean, I like his talent set. He does well when given opportunities. And I think the way they're going to compete is going to allow Hugh Jackson to be a little more balanced this year. The line is just – Latavius Murray's not good. And the line can make you look okay. It made Darren McFadden look okay in 2015. So a solid line can make a bad player look okay. I think Crowell's an okay player. It's going to make him look good. So, Cleveland, yeah. But how about O-lines in general? I mean, do they kind of sway you when you have a player like, man, 29A and 29B? We always say 1A, 1B, but let's say you're sitting there on draft day and like, boy, I really don't know who I want to take between, this flex option and this flex option. Do you look just the offense as a whole, or is the line kind of something that's really critical to you?
I think it has to be considered. That's why I said, like, I don't necessarily say it's my deciding factor. Kind of the same way I look at the Andrew Luck line factor as well. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm not going to draft Andrew Luck or put him outside my top 10 because his line is terrible. But at the same time, if I'm looking at two players in the low 20s and one of them has a top 5 offensive line and one of them has a bottom 5 offensive line, that's going to make my answer very easy. You know what I mean? Like, how could it not?
Right.
Yeah, I do take it into some consideration. I mean, it's probably pretty low on my scale, but definitely for running backs, I consider it. Like, if Todd Gurley was on the Browns, I would draft him number 1 overall. Right. If Todd Gurley plays where he plays, I probably don't draft him unless I get him in the 3rd round. So it is definitely a matter of offensive line talent to some extent because it's not Todd's fault. So,
all right. So all around, something you should consider. I don't think any of us wants you to throw away offensive line statistics, but don't make critical decisions based on it, I guess.
Sure.
Like Rocco did with Todd Gurley last year.
Whoops.
Number 1 overall. Had to throw that out there. All right, so let's go from talking about the Browns and their offensive line to let's get into some things that are actually going to score some points. So, here's going to be our air raid discussion, and nothing can swing a fantasy head-to-head matchup the way a big scoring play can. So, there's this joy of you're sitting there watching Stat Tracker, and it's Sunday afternoon, and all of a sudden your guy catches a 75-yard touchdown pass, and bang, I got 13 and a half more points than I did, 2 seconds ago. Or even, 20-plus if you happen to be a guy like me that loves the quarterback-receiver combo. Can really swing things quickly. So here's kind of my stat I want to kick around here. Only 4 quarterbacks averaged 10 or more air yards per throw last year. So forget about yards after catch. The ball traveled an average of more than 10 per throw. That's Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, which surprised me, and Carson Palmer. So,
which surprises you more, right?
Well, Palmer doesn't surprise me because it doesn't say any of these were completed or to. It's just that they threw the ball far. So my question here, knowing that there's only 4 guys and those are the 4, how does this affect how you rank not only just necessarily those 4, but the skill players around them as well? You talk about Carolina, Tampa, those kind of receivers. Does that sway you knowing, hey, this is a coaching staff who's willing to call these plays and, more importantly, a quarterback who's willing to chuck it?
To be clear for everyone out there, Miles, this is per throw, not completion, correct?
This is per throw, yes.
Yep.
I think even though all 4 of us at this point have pretty much given up on Carson Palmer, I still think that this is something that we consider. I know myself and Miles, I don't know really how Deal feels about it. He's been a little quiet, I think, leading up to this. But we're both looking at Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota to have – well, I'm looking at both of them. Miles is definitely looking at Winston to have huge breakout years this year. This is kind of like one of those telling signs of that. You know what I mean? And I love it for guys like myself and like Miles who go after the combos. So it's not just Jameis Winston, but it's Jameis and Mike Evans. If Mike Evans is catching the ball 5 yards further down the field to start than the average receiver, that bodes well for Mike Evans in fantasy value, Yeah. So it only makes sense, and obviously, Mariota's in this group already, and now we add Corey Davis to the mix of wide receivers for the Tennessee Titans. It just bodes well for these guys. Cam, I could take or leave at this point. I really want to see how they approach this season. What's going to happen with the running back situation. It seems like they're really stacked on offense, or tried to stack up on offense to try and get back to 2 years ago. Palmer, you can kind of throw this out for, but I definitely think it's a telling stat overall, just because, the guys that we like, the guys that we see on the rise are on this list and really have gotten better. Miles said this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to steal it from him, but Jameis Winston did that last year, yes, with Mike Evans, but without like a speed, deep threat, and now they've added Deshaun Jackson. So yikes. Okay. This is absolutely something I'm going to consider when drafting, my fantasy team.
Yeah, I'm not in the Cam hating group. I want Cam for sure this season, and so I hope I beat Miles to him. It's a race to Jameis and Cam, but
there you go.
I love the first three guys. I'm not going to draft Mariota. We talked in depth today, and we've talked before about his inconsistency. I'm not willing to risk those 5-point games on him for the 40-point game. I'm just not. That's just not my game, and it's worked for me. So I'm going to stick with my strategy so far. The guy that I do like, you touched on a little bit. I love Deshaun Jackson this season. He's been healthy. You could shake your head. You can be wrong.
No. I'm last week I talked about how Rocco and I are going to hate each other's teams. One of us is going to be so jealous of the other one's team.
We're going to split guys
because I could go Jameis Deshaun in every league.
Oh man,
my head might explode.
Yeah, I'm gonna put this out there, and I'm gonna write it down for everybody that doesn't know. We write down our crazy predictions. Receiving touchdowns, Deshaun Jackson's double digits for the first time in his career this season. It's happening. That's not that crazy. A dude that can throw the ball. Finally, a dude that can throw the ball to him. It has a cannon that Deshaun Jackson cannot outrun, and Deshaun Jackson looked outstanding last year. Now, I know Kirk Cousins is no slouch, but
I was just going to say Kirk Cousins is pretty good.
It's very different, though.
It's a completely different game, it's a completely different game, which bodes excellent for Deshaun Jackson. Yep. So I love Deshaun Jackson to be over 10 touchdowns. I don't think he's going to be up in that 1,300-yard mark where he touched a couple times, but he could be close. I'm not going to be shocked, and I'm not going to be shocked if it's on my squad, Miles.
That's make me sad. So this is a big considerate for me as well. Not so much for the quarterbacks, because I already had my mind made up on my quarterback situation in every league I can this year. It's going to be Jameis. And it wasn't even this stat. I saw one kind of last week that Jameis had almost 68% of his yardage last year, the ball traveling through the air, which led the league by a lot. So he's not reliant on yards after the catch. He's just chucking it. And now, like we've said, he has Deshaun and O.J. Howard and et cetera, et cetera. But the thing you guys didn't touch on that I just want to throw out there as a considerate for me is when I look at this stat for these four players, it really makes me like the running backs on these teams. Not that – I mean, how don't you like David Johnson anyways? And really, they're good situations across the board. But when you have quarterbacks and offensive coordinators that are calling plays and running plays where you have to respect the deep ball at all times, it really opens up the running lanes as well. So it makes those running backs more attractive. And that's further proven by – I didn't even mention this name to you guys because I went with the 10-plus air yards. The guy in fifth in this stat with 9.8 air yards per throw is Tyrod Taylor, and Shady had an okay year. So it really, you look at Jonathan Stewart and the Murray Henry combo and DJ and Shady, and I don't really want to talk about the Bucs running backs last year because of the injury bug, but the running backs on these teams had really solid years. So these are the kind of stats that I do like, not just to rank my quarterbacks, but really the players around them. It means more to me because it's teams taking shots to score points, and I love that.
Yeah.
All right, so speaking of running backs, this one's kind of less of an analytic stat and more I'm kind of fishing for what you guys think about running backs. But, NFL teams often draft running backs that fit their system. That makes a lot of sense. But in a sense, you see fantasy owners that sort of do the same thing. There's certain people that like the big back. There's certain people that like, I'm never going to draft Danny Woodhead. I don't care how many years in a row he has 90 catches. That's just not my style. Yeah. Here's my stat here. Top 5 players in rushing yards outside the tackles last year were LaShawn McCoy, DeMarco Murray, Zeke Elliott, David Johnson, and Jay Ajayi. The top 5 players rushing yards inside the tackles, Jordan Howard, Zeke Elliott, Lev Bell, Jay Ajayi, Lamar Miller. So when you look at stats like that, and obviously all those guys had pretty solid years, what type of back do you kind of prefer? So what kind of metrics are you looking at? Are you looking at broken tackles or missed tackles forced, which are 2 different things? Do you care about that kind of thing? And more importantly, what does it say about Zeke Elliott and Jay Ajayi to be on both of these lists?
I don't think that this particular stat is all that telling for me. And mainly,
totally agree.
Mainly because 1, 2 of the guys are both on the list. That all that tells me is both of those guys got a lot of carries in their run first offense. That's what that tells me. And secondly, every name on this list is a top 10 guy. Okay. Right. It'd be more telling for me if one guy on this list was, somebody that we had ranked in like the 22nd overall spot. That would be more important to me. Yes, schemes matter. We're not generally, right now, I'll throw this out because we talk about it all the time. Right now, the Packers running back spot is so, it's great in a PPR because Ty Montgomery is that guy, but you're not drafting Ty Montgomery in a league because you think he's going to be a superstar running back, in terms of rushing yards. So scheme has to matter. Absolutely. But in this particular instance, I don't think this has anything to do with the schemes of these particular teams. These, what is it? It wound up being 5 and 5, 2 of them repeat. So these 7 backs, these 8 guys are the best 8 running backs in terms of fantasy football. And then you also, we'll say 8 of the top 10 because Devontae Freeman didn't make either of these lists, but I'm sure was very close behind probably in both of those categories, right. So guys like that. But like when you're talking about the top 10, I don't think it matters too much, to be honest. I don't. I think, like I said, it would matter a lot more if, we had some guys creeping up that we had ranked lower in one specific category, but generally not just for top 5.
Yeah, I'd almost rather see these stats on a per carry basis to make it a little more valid. But to me, I agree. What does it say about Zeke Elliott that he's on both lists? It says he led the league in rushing. Like, right. Of course he's on both of the lists. He had like 200 yards more than everybody else. I'd like to see where we mentioned it before. Isaiah Crowell ranks on these things. What can I count on him doing? One thing I wanted to throw in there, you just mentioned Ty Montgomery. Kind of, again, paralysis by analysis, stats that don't matter. Ty Montgomery had, this is what I saw about him, runs outside the tackles, yards per carry after first contact, if you can follow all this. He had 7.05 yards per carry after contact, which is like almost 3 yards per carry more than anybody else in the league. So why does that matter? Crickets. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So like, be careful. This kind of stat. I purposely put this one in here because, like, yeah, okay, these guys ran for a lot of yards. That's why they're pre-ranked top 10, every one of them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this is gonna be the last time I read this stat because I don't put any thought at all into it. The thing that I read is if they ran inside or outside, were they a good running back? Where their offensive coordinator told them to run to, were they good at it?
It didn't go well. Yeah.
That matters a lot more to me than where did they run to. Well, they ran where their offensive coordinator told them to. Then did they do it well or not?
Well, see, that's super interesting to me, and like the stat itself is very interesting to me. It's just I don't put a lot of stock in it in terms of fantasy. One of the reasons that people talked about DeMarco Murray not doing that great in Philadelphia was because he doesn't fit that kind of system. But in Tennessee, where he can, on outside runs, he runs to the outside, makes one cut when he hits the hole, and was gone a lot. You know what I mean? So it just fit him better. At the same time, you want to know why Lev is top 5 in yards ran inside the tackles? Because we've talked about this in the past. He has a running style that is unlike anything we've ever seen in terms of starting and stopping and hiding behind linemen and then exploding when he sees the hole. That's all inside the tackles. So, yeah, it's a cool stat. And, yes, it absolutely matters for these guys. But these guys are top 10 regardless of at least in their current systems. You know what I mean? If DeMarco Murray got traded, then yes, this stat would matter to me, because if the Eagles made a trade back for DeMarco Murray, I'm out again.
If Lev Bell got traded, I would pick him up wherever, because his offense,
yeah.
all his offensive coordinator needs to say is, this is going to be a running play, because he has the best vision we've ever seen. So they say, here, hey Ben, hand the ball to him, and then he'll figure it out.
Yeah, he's going to stand there until everybody over pursues and then go.
Yeah, no, I agree. But like I said, it's based on the fact that all these guys are. Well, it does matter, but it doesn't for these guys, because they're in the same offense they were last year.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's another one of those. It just doesn't matter for fantasy. It's a cool stat to look at, but all I see is guys ran for yards. Good. That's why I wanted them in the first place.
Yep,
I don't care where you go to get it. All right. So speaking of stats that I don't know how crazy we're about, let's talk a little bit about quarterbacks here and the pressure cooker. That's what we're going to call this one. As we covered with Luck, a quarterback Sunday, it's just not always filled with 7-step drops, clean pockets, easy completions. Sometimes protection's going to break down. As a fantasy owner, if your protection breaks down, I still want results. I don't care. Take an Advil after the game. You better still get me 3 touchdowns.
Right.
So the stat that I considered for this one here, the NFL average quarterback rating under pressure last season was 64.5. That's not great. Top 5 in reverse order. Tom Brady was 84.9. Russell Wilson 85.9. Matt Ryan 87.2. Sammy Sleeves Bradford at 87.7. And Aaron Rodgers was tops in the league at 93.8 rating under pressure. So, we analyze the offensive lines. We kind of covered that already when we're considering rankings, but how much do you care about it making a difference that your guy can still get it done, even if his offensive line is not real strong?
I want to go first. Generally speaking, any stat that includes Samuel J. Bradford, I don't know if that's his middle initial.
It's Samuel T. Bradford.
Samuel T. Bradford.
I don't know if that's right either.
Who knows?
But
any stat that involves Samuel Bradford is usually one that I'm going to get rid of. You know what though? Like,
especially if he's second in the league. Like,
yeah, this is.
It is Jay.
Is it really? Yes.
Jacob. You had a 1 in 26 shot. You nailed it.
Nailed it. No, seriously though. This stat I love and I hate, because it shows right off the top, like, the other 4 guys in this group are elite quarterbacks. Fantastic quarterbacks. It doesn't matter whether or not there's pressure or the pocket is completely, a 100% clean. They're just great quarterbacks. Bradford is kind of like the anomaly in this group. His rating is so high because he's not throwing the ball down the field ever. I mean, there's a reason why we call this guy Sammy Checkdown. Like, all of his passes are only going 5 yards anyway. So even when there's pressure, it's just, there's the tight end. There's the running back. You know what I mean? But I don't consider it, 1, because it involves Samuel Bradford, and 2, because the other 4 guys are great regardless. You know what I mean? So it's one that I kind of have to throw out just because, I mean, I guess somewhere down the line I might consider it, at, 18, 19, 20, if I'm looking at a second or third quarterback, depending on what type of league you're in. But if you're in a 10-team league and you're going one starting quarterback, the top 10 quarterbacks that you take, this stat is not going to matter for.
Yeah, I think Deal and I were just kind of nodding along because there's really very little to add.
Yeah, it's not something. It's not something I'm going to consider at all. Like Rocco touched on, Sam Bradford, not a guy I'm drafting in a 32-team league. So I'm going to take somebody's backup first. So he's not the guy I'm taking. I might take Teddy Bridgewater actually. I might.
There you go.
But yeah, it's not. We touched on a little bit earlier that offensive line is something that we are concerned in some things. Quarterback, not much. So.
Okay. All right. So finally here tonight, we're going to hit a little bit on defense. Don't worry, not fantasy team defense. We don't want to take you there. And IDP, if you do that, God bless you. I don't know what to say. But, we love juicy matchups when on Tuesday when you go to set your lineup or as much as Deal loves this for me on Thursday when my guys are in their starting spot, you see the little opponent icon and it's green or it's yellow or it's red. And we love those juicy matchups, but nothing fears more than when you see that red team name, and not necessarily against your studs, but your marginal starters. You're like, oh, crap, can I really start Jordan Matthews against the Broncos here? And then you got another one down the line, and it's kind of one of the tougher parts about being a fantasy owner. So here's my stat. It's a little bit of a long one, so snap in. When we're looking at multiple coverage metrics, I'm talking about D-backs here. Players like Chris Harris, Patrick Peterson, Richard Sherman, they've proven impossible to put up stats against. You're already scared of the defenses. Then when you look at individual players, unless they're facing the premier receivers, Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, and guys that are going to get theirs, they've proven almost unbeatable. So here's their individual stats. Over the last 4 years, Chris Harris allows under 0.8 yards per coverage snap, which is ridiculous. If he's covering somebody 600 times next year, he's only given up like 500 total yards, which is insane. Then you got Patrick Peterson. Last year, he did have 601 coverage snaps. He saw 71 targets. That makes him the most avoided cornerback in the league by a lot. And then finally, Richard Sherman, when he's at his normal left corner position, Seattle usually doesn't follow around the field. When he's at his normal left corner, which was 436 snaps, he allowed a whopping 39.9 quarterback rating when he was targeted at his normal spot. So, when you're looking at those individual things, again, you've got the guys like Jordan Matthews or even upgrade that to his current teammate, Alshon Jeffrey, who, not a guaranteed stud. How much do you consider not just the pass defense as a whole, but those individual corner matchups? If Philly played Denver, Alshon Jeffrey's seeing Chris Harris all day. So do you play him or do you kind of avoid that situation when you set your roster? Again, beyond your receiver one. Julio's in my lineup, period. Probably even if he tears his ACL, I'm going to put him in there and hope for the best. but the rest, the rest of those guys, what do you see happen? What do you do? What do you consider when you look at individuals?
Well, I think like you said, Miles, obviously start your studs. If you draft a guy, who's a top 10 wide receiver, you're going to start him no matter what. But then not necessarily I'm looking at the matchups ahead of time before I even draft a guy. All right, I'll give you a prime example. Not that they have great wide receivers to begin with, but knowing that right off the bat, they're going to have 4 games where they play Richard Sherman twice and Patrick Peterson twice. You're not going to want to draft mediocre wide receivers from the 49ers or the Rams.
Pierre Garcon's not in your top 50.
No, not now. Okay, Tavon Austin, not doing it for me. Okay, and to go even further with you, I looked it up already, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of help here. Not just you guys, but our listeners, because that's what we're supposed to be here for, to give help and to give advice. When you're looking at that middle of the pack wide receivers, why don't you potentially avoid some of the middle of the pack wide receivers from the NFC East this year who have to play the AFC West and the NFC West, which means you're playing Harris, you're playing Sherman, you're playing Peterson. So,
and you're playing Josh Norman in the division.
And you're playing Josh Norman in your own division.
But you're playing Nolan Carroll, which is nice.
Yeah.
You're playing whoever Philly rolls out there at corner. It might be the 3 of us. We're not sure.
That makes up. Those 2 games make up for the other 6.
I hear you. You're potentially you're talking about Philly, Dallas, and Washington that are playing 5 of their games where their number 1 receiver has to go up against Harris, Sherman, Peterson, or Norman. That's 5 of your 16 games.
And you know what? Like you said, you're going to start Odell. I get that. You're the Giants. You're going to start Odell. You're going to start you're going to start Dez to some extent. But, not to pick on you, Miles, but we can use the Redskins as an example too. Neither of those teams right now have a it guy. You know what I mean? So with that being said, maybe you want to steer clear. If you're looking at the difference between, let's just throw out some names here.
Alshon Jeffrey or DeAndre Hopkins.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And now it's a matter of, well, Hopkins doesn't have to play Harris, Sherman, and Peterson this season. You know what I mean? So I'm going to go with him. You know what I mean? And that's how you have to look at it. Obviously, once the guys are on your team, it's a week-to-week basis of who has the best matchup. You know what I mean? Outside of the studs, like we said. But, now when you should be looking at who's going to be drafted, those are things you have to consider.
Let me propose something to you here. Let's keep using Alshon as an example because I think it actually fits really well what we're discussing here. Where he's on a team where he is the number one target. Ideally, he probably will be. So he's going to see those major corners week in and week out. Let's say leading into Seattle, he's put up back-to-back weeks where he's like, 6 for 110 and a touchdown, and then 8 for 120. And he's feeling hot. He's connecting well with Wentz. What do you do there? Do you play him against these studs?
Who's your other option?
I mean, similar ranking.
Somebody comparable.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying, do you start him or do you start Jermaine Kearse? Like, just say you have somebody out there that has a better.
Well, Jermaine Kearse would be playing the Eagles in that situation, so I might start Jermaine Kearse.
Yikes, got me there. Threw down the game a little bit. But let's just say you have a guy who's not putting up the numbers that Alshon is, but he's got a juicy matchup and he's playing okay. What do you do?
I'm going to sit Alshon.
See, I want to know what the juicy matchup is, and I
just
want to
envision one, man.
I know, but
it's 14. Give me a break over here.
No, that's what I'm saying though. Like, it's easy to say. I'm going to sit Alshon.
You've got Martavis Bryant. You've got Martavis Bryant.
Let's say Jarvis.
Oh, okay.
Say Jarvis is playing. Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to think that both of those guys would probably be starting for me in the first place, but no, I guess in that situation, I'd probably wind up going Jarvis. But at the same time, like, Alshon's a weird case for me personally, and maybe you guys feel this way, maybe you don't. I think Alshon, when 100% healthy, has the ability to be a true number one wide receiver in this league. And at which case, if he's 100% healthy and he's clicking with Carson Wentz, I think he can be potentially starter proof at that point. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying he's a top 5 wide receiver, but I'm saying he has all the physical tools to be a true number one wide receiver. We saw that already in his career, and that was with Jay Cutler. So, you know what I mean? Like, we need him to stay healthy. We need to see what he can do with Carson Wentz. But like maybe for me personally, that's just a bad example for this particular matchup. But absolutely, in general, if I have two guys who I consider equal, I would sit them versus Sherman.
I think that last part that you said about Jay Cutler, I think that was a little unfair because Wentz hasn't done anything this far, no offense to him because I love him, to prove that he's better than Jay Cutler. I mean, Jay Cutler put up 500-yard games from time to time. So, like, I don't think that's relevant because he loved Alshon. So I think Alshon was the beneficiary of that. But, yeah, I am absolutely – if there's a guy that's comparable, I agreed with Rocco. If Alshon and Jarvis are my starters this season, that's awesome. But if I have a situation where for some reason I never ever would, but I had AB and those two guys and I'm starting Jarvis.
Yeah, I guess kind of to refocus, we kind of got off on do we believe in Alshon rabbit trail there a little bit. Regardless of the guy, I guess my point is, and I think our discussion kind of answers my question. Especially with wide receiver, because it's really, I think, the most valid point here. Do you guys consider these individual matchups when you're setting lineups? I mean, the discussion got juicy, so you have to.
Yeah, you have to.
Maybe not to the point where everybody's per coverage snap yardage allowed.
Right.
You know what I mean? But when you see, maybe such and such team is like 14th against the pass. Let's just say Denver ends up being that. But if you got the number one receiver, Chris Harris is probably shutting that down. So this is one that I look at, but I will say, knowing myself, 9 times out of 10, I land with, in my scenario, Alshon, whoever I've been rolling with, because I hate. There's nothing worse than sitting there and watching your guy somehow be the guy that puts up 25 on Richard Sherman, and you're like, well, I started him 10 straight weeks, and then I benched him out of fear, and now I lost. I hate that feeling. At least if I start him, I can blame him, not me. I like blaming my players a lot more than I like blaming me. Keenan Allen.
Can I take 10 seconds to comment that it didn't get any press on here, but it deserves it? Your titles were unbelievable. Island Vacation, Pressure
This
Cooker,
is called the Island Vacation.
Air Raid, Road Graders, Andrew's Luck. I hated that one, but the rest of them were really stellar. So pat on the back to you, man. You deserve it for that.
Like, my game was on point as I was creating the agenda today. I'll be honest.
I agree 100%.
All right, folks. So believe it or not, this felt like it went so quick, but that's going to do it for this edition of the Football Goons podcast. We hope you really enjoyed the discussion. And again, we're asking you to get active for us on social media. We can't imagine any way we shouldn't be your go-to destination for all things fantasy football. So ask away, share our responses to help us change the industry. We want a big chunk of this thing because we think we deserve it. So especially as we get closer to the season, let's get involved out there. We're going to have our first set of positional rankings releasing this week. And Deal's worked hard on the site to get this thing not only sortable by position, because you can get that anywhere, but we're going to have a search bar where you can type in Alshon Jeffrey, and he's going to pop up. You're going to see where each of the 4 of us have him ranked, as well as his average among the group. We're trying to throw you guys things you can't get other places. So, in addition to the fantasy discussion, we've got a few fun arguments locked and loaded for the coming weeks, and we're hopefully getting our guy South back as soon as next episode. Let's keep our fingers crossed to get the big dog back out here. If not, hopefully the week after that. Maybe we can get him to go on another Cowboys rant this offseason, because let's be honest, that was one of the greatest moments in recorded audio history. So, we want to get him back in the fold here. But again, we thank you guys for checking in. As always, you can find us on footballgoons.com. Again, you're going to find those rankings posted there this week. Follow us on facebook.com/footballgoons, on the Twitter @footballgoons. And make sure you subscribe here on YouTube. Catch notifications of when we're going live. We've been doing this live for about a month now, and it's going great. So we want to thanks again for the listen. And as always, we'll catch you next time.